We'll move on to our next bill. It is Senate Bill 370. Jason, can you give us an overview, and we'll open the hearing on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 370 would enact the Defend the Guard Act. This bill concerns the Kansas National Guard and members of the Guard. Primarily, it would prevent the release of the National Guard or any members of the National Guard into active duty combat unless the United States Congress had made an official declaration of war or had taken official action to explicitly call forth the Kansas National Guard for the purposes of ensuring execution of the laws of the country, to repel an invasion, or to suppress an insurrection, which are the constitutionally enumerated powers for Congress to call forth the state militia. In addition to that restriction on use of the Guard, the bill would also contains a provision where no member of the Kansas National Guard shall be compelled to receive or be disciplined for refusing to receive any COVID-19 vaccination or other medical treatment for the COVID-19 virus. This is notwithstanding any other federal or state law to the contrary. Finally, the bill provides that nothing in this act would limit or prohibit the governor from consenting to the use of the Kansas National Guard or its members as defense support for a civil authority mission within the United States or the territories thereof. This is essentially typically the federal response to disasters such as a hurricane or a storm. The bill does define active duty combat on page 2, an official declaration of war, to be specific as to those instances when the Guard members could be called into active duty combat. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions? Senator Reichman.
Thank you again, and thank you for bringing this. I kind of can understand some of the concerns people have. I just don't know how well this will hold up in the courts. If the President of the United States orders the Guard to go someplace and it's not declared war, I don't know how we could stop it. That's my first thing. And the second thing, is there any other states have anything like this that you know of that says, well, you can't do that. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. To answer the second part first, I do believe this legislation has been at least proposed in some other states. Andrew and I can double check to see if it's actually been enacted in any other states. The first question you asked really becomes a constitutional interpretation question as to the extent of the president's authority to initiate action by the state militias absent one of those enumerated actions under the Constitution, under Article 1 of the Constitution. The legislation tries to clarify that, but obviously if they were called into active duty combat contrary to this statute, there could potentially be litigation and a court ultimately deciding whether or not the federal Constitution permitted such federal action, which would be supreme and superior to any state law to the contrary because of the sovereignty provision.
Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, if this bill were enacted, would it prevent any federal funding going to the Kansas National Guard?
Not that I'm aware of, but obviously in our research as to other states that may have enacted this bill, we can certainly look into that question.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, would this prevent, like currently we have 200 National Guard troops from Georgia in Ukraine as an advisory role? It's not an active duty, not an active combat area, but it is a pretty hot spot. Would it prevent them from being deployed?
It would prevent them being released into what is defined as active duty combat under the legislation. Now, whether or not that situation currently could be defined as active duty combat, I don't know. If the situation changes to the point where it could be defined as such, then yes, the bill would arguably prevent the deployment of those members of the National Guard into, remaining in that area and engaging in what is defined as active duty combat.
Further questions, comments? Senator Longbine.
Thank you. Jason, could you get us a definition of active duty combat? Because my interpretation of active duty is any time that a National Guard member would be called into active duty, taking them out of their normal routine, which would be training once a month with some additional timing. I believe anytime they're deployed, they're considered active duty. So I think that makes a tremendous difference if you could try to get us a true definition of what this bill does.
Well, I can tell you that the bill defines active duty combat as participation in an armed conflict, performance of hazardous service relating to an armed conflict in a foreign state, or the performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war. Those are the specific instances of engagement in active duty combat under the bill. Now, whether the National Guard and federal military law has a different definition, we would have to look at that, but that would not be necessarily applicable under this statute and these restrictions as it's specifically defined here.
I suspect there is a different definition from them, so if we could get that definition so we could compare them, might be helpful.
Sure.
Okay, further questions? Not seeing any. We'll move on to Bob Corkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bob Corkins. I represent Frontier Peace Advisors. Our organization is the one that initiated this movement in Kansas this past year. It is in collaboration with a national organization called Defend the Guard, and we'll be hearing from the head of that organization next in the conferees. But I can tell you, just to respond to a couple of questions here first, this is a relatively new movement. The legislation has been introduced in over 30 states so far, has not passed anywhere yet, came close in West Virginia, but ours, if we enacted it, would be the first state to do so. With regard to funding, I'll call your attention to the fiscal note on the bill that was prepared by the governor's budget office with the input from the Adjutant General's office, and they conclude that there is no fiscal effect to this bill. That's very important because in other states in which this has been introduced, that's been the primary concern. Is there a risk of losing federal funding if this bill's passed and Congress retaliates against us for passing this legislation? And for a variety of reasons, I believe that's an implausible threat. We'll be happy to delve into that in more detail later. But I think it's refreshing that the fiscal note on this acknowledges no fiscal impact because anything would be speculative if it were to happen. And ultimately, Congress holds the purse strings here, and so probably the best people to get feedback from would be our congressional delegation. And we're working on that, in fact. But that just gives you a tip-off on some of the issues. I want to give you just a brief introduction. Obviously, it's a simple bill. I don't need to get into the particular language. It's a real short bill. But the question is why? And why now? And you don't have to look any further than the headlines that are in the paper. The saber rattling in Ukraine, Taiwan, and the big question is, where is the United States going to send our troops next into combat? It's a very heady call, folks. And then the question comes down to one of state autonomy, state self-determination, our Constitution, and these are all referenced within the bill itself, that declares our governor to be the commander-in-chief of the militia, period. And it specifically directs the legislature to regulate the discipline of our Guard troops, which takes into account that COVID issue. But a declaration of war is something we haven't done in a long time in the United States. Last time was 1942. So we've had an 8-year span in which the state guard units have been integrated a lot more into active combat duties. The House resolution that passed last year, 6011, I believe was the one, gave a long laundry list of all the foreign combat engagements in which the Kansas Guard has played a part in, starting with the Civil War up through some of the more modern Middle East operations. So that's the question. Are we going to have a formal declaration of war as we used to do? 8 times in the last century, we formally declared war. And the success of the following police actions falls far short of those engagements in which the whole support of the country was rallied behind a real war effort. And we saw how successful it is when the United States takes that kind of unified stand, and how sorely it's lacking when we don't. I've hit on the high points here. You really need to hear from the other proponents on the bill. I thank you for your time. I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, what do you think some of the reasons are for it not passing in those other states where you said legislation has been introduced?
Well, I'd say 2 reasons. First of all, it's a relatively new movement. I think it only started a couple of years ago. And so there's that learning curve to get past. The other factor would clearly be the role of adjutant generals in other states who, fearing that this might result in some loss of federal funding for their state guards, are throwing up a lot of caution flags and concern, and that general reaction from the current adjutants probably explains it.
Further questions? Not seeing any, thank you.
Thanks.
We'll move on. Do we have a virtual setup ready to go for Sergeant Dan McKnight?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify here in Kansas. I'm a 13-year veteran of the United States military. I served in the Marine Corps, in the Army, and in the Army National Guard. And I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2005, 2006, and 2007. I sustained combat injuries there, and I came home and was forced to retire because of the injuries. I'm also the chairman of a veterans organization comprised mostly of global war on terror veterans, and we are working all across the country to help enact Defend the Guard legislation. With Defend the Guard, you often hear a lot of emotional statements in support and opposition. You hear statements of patriotism, funding, jobs, national pride, duty, and honor. These are all words that we take very important. But I encourage you to remain focused on the purpose of the bill, which is simply to strengthen the constitutional principles regarding the ability to take our nation, and by extension our National Guard, from a state of peace into a state of war. I think we've heard it before, but Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution is the Militia Clause. And the militia or the National Guard may be called forth into federal service to repel an invasion, put down an insurrection, or enforce the law of the land. And that's the one that we're here to talk about today, enforcing the law of the Union. Since 1942, as we just heard from Mr. Corkin, Congress has willfully given away their duty and responsibility. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution gives Congress and Congress only the ability to take our nation into war. And the result of that abdication has been endless war. The National Guard has become an auxiliary and a reserve component for the military. And this is a proper role for the National Guard if it's done with the right authority. The National Guard can be called into federal service 2 different ways, and I hope this answers the question from the good senator a moment ago. Title 32 is for domestic and civil defense and national emergencies. Some examples of this are the Kansas National Guard that is currently activated to deal with COVID relief, assisting in food banks, district health centers, local hospitals, healthcare facilities, and medical centers, and testing centers all across the state. Or in California, where the National Guard participates in active firefighting, or Texas National Guard when they helped with the Arctic blast last year. Then the other way is Title 10, which is primarily used to call the National Guard to participate in an armed conflict, in war, in humanitarian relief, or training outside of the United States. And part of Title 10 has already been addressed by the Supreme Court, and I hope this helps to kind of clear up some of the issues. The Supreme Court, in a case called Perpich versus the Department of Defense, said that the federal government may authorize members of the National Guard to be ordered into federal active duty service for the purposes of training outside of the United States without either the consent of the governor or the affected state or a declaration of national emergency. The Supreme Court specifically did not address combat in the Perpich decision because the Constitution is already very clear on how, when, and where the National Guard or the state militia can be federalized. And a declaration of war satisfies that clause in the Constitution that says the National Guard may be called into federal service to enforce the laws of the Union. Now, it's important to remember the Constitution states that the President and Congress may now call forth the militia for three purposes. We've said them before: to put down an insurrection, repel an invasion, and enforce the law of the Union. In the Montgomery Amendment, it talks about that, and that was the Perpich decision that strengthened it. So when Congress declares war, this is very important to understand. When Congress declares war, it changes the state of our nation and it becomes the law of the Union. And the National Guard can and should be on the tip of the spear. They should be activated into federal service under Title 10 to fight and win and then come home. Without a declaration of war, though, that last part never seems to happen. And if Congress wants the citizens, tradesmen, teachers, firefighters, police officers of Kansas to go and fight our nation's wars, which they are prepared and capable to do in probably the most professional manner, then Congress must first put their name on the line before Kansas National Guardsmen put their boots on the ground. And the Defend the Guard is a way for states, for the people, to reclaim their power from the federal government. We are a federalist nation, and it's important to remember that. In 2001, Congress abdicated their responsibility, and instead of declaring war after the attacks on 9/11, they issued an authorization of use of military force, which is a blank check that gives the executive the ability to take the military anywhere in the world for any length of time, for any dollar amount, with any checks or balances. 85% of Congress that signed that AUMF is no longer there, and it's never been reissued. It's never been revisited by Congress. We are becoming an empire, and that's not how this is supposed to work. We have allowed this runaway federal government and allowed one man or one woman to commit us to war, the executive, the president. And he or she has repeatedly used the National Guard to prop up opium, pedophile cultures, and warlord cultures in faraway lands where we have no discernible security interest. And finally, the men and women of the National Guard have my admiration and respect. They've been repeatedly deployed to the global war on terror in Africa, the Middle East. Now we're seeing the Florida and Georgia National Guards in Ukraine, Taiwan. And they have the best skills, training, equipment, and professionalism among all the United States military. But, it was a great 21st century philosopher that said, when you bow down before the gods that you serve, you're always going to get what you deserve. And well, unlike the swamp in Washington, D.C., I personally, and my brothers and sisters in arms that have joined our movement, we do not bow down and recognize the gods of endless war and the gods of war profiteering and the gods of the military industrial complex. My God inspired the founding fathers to create the Constitution, which protects our God-given rights, and the people have granted certain rights and powers to the federal government. And committing American lives and treasure to war is a power that we have granted them, and they have abused that power by abdicating their responsibility. Defend the Guard realigns that power and authority within the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Okay, we'll move on. Okay.
Yes, my name is Al Turwelp. I'm the political director of the Libertarian Party of Kansas, and I'm speaking here this morning on behalf of the state chairman and the executive committee. I'm going to leave some of the details about this bill and the specifics that Mr. McKnight, Mr. Corbins said. I'm going to give you the point of view of the Libertarian Party of Kansas. We believe that this is an issue that Kansans were not aware that we needed to address. Due to the growing military tensions around the world, particularly in the Ukraine, it is clear Kansans needs to make some important decisions. This bill protects the members of the Kansas National Guard, upholds our nation and state's constitutional rules of law, and safeguards Kansas state sovereignty. The Constitution clearly states that all wars must be congressionally passed and declared. It is our right and within our power in Kansas to withhold deployment of the National Guard troops from active combat zones where there has not been a congressional declaration of war. The reasons for our support of SB 370 can be epitomized by the valued and proven advantages of three ideas important to libertarianism, those being process, constitutionality, and humanitarianism. Process, like words and actions, are tremendously important and have great meaning. This applies to the most dangerous and costly government enterprise of all, the decision to switch our nation from a state of peace to a state of war. Yet since World War II, we have had federal executives dictate to us rather than a system where representatives make decisions through a process of discovery. This is not democracy. Congress has not done their sworn duty for decades. The Constitution, among other things, is a process document. We have a broken process. History tells us that presidents, emperors, and kings are often the most invested in war and most prone to it. The lack of process eliminates and disregards the checks and balance designs of the Constitution. It is difficult to reason a just cause and deploy Kansas troops into imminent danger to achieve the rightings of wrongs when there is no legal or sufficient competent authority that the Constitution requires. A just war cannot exist with America as the aggressor, and it must also be initiated by the legitimate political authority, that being the U.S. Congress. Libertarians seek a limited and constrained government. The Kansas Constitution states that the governor is the commander-in-chief of our troops, and the Kansas National Guard is an instrument of state power. The 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution reserves the power to control and discipline troops to the states and the people. This bill also restrains the power of our state executive by requiring the governor to comply with this act until there is an official congressional declared war. We believe there are no serious threats to funding upon the enactment of this bill. Any threat of reducing Kansas funding in retaliation would be viewed by the populace as extremely unethical, hostile, and bullying. We highly doubt Congress, who doesn't currently vote to declare war, would vote a reduction, nor do we believe our U.S. senators and congressmen would tolerate this action. The Adjutant General Department has issued a fiscal statement, as Mr. Corkins has mentioned, that states that this would not have any fiscal effect. Lastly, the best way to show our appreciation and respect for our troops is to deploy them through legal congressional process on missions that are fully supported by the legislature. We do not honor them by sending them on missions they should not be on, in foreign lands where they should not be. This bill respects our Kansas Guard, their families, by not sending them into harm's way in error, nor does it in the damaging of them physically, financially, through their disruption of their employment and the stressing of their family relationships. Congress will not end the declared wars, so the state of Kansas must do it. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Not seeing any? Senator Fascadell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, so can you just elaborate a little bit on the COVID piece in the legislation? Thank you.
Yes, I would say that the Libertarian Party has already made some statements earlier during last fall when there was the special hearing. The Libertarian Party does not support in any way the forcing of vaccinations, and that would apply to the National Guard as well. So this is consistent with our beliefs. Obviously, it will be up to you to make the decision if this is what needs to be done, or if this body wants to make some sort of amendment to that would be consistent with what the governor has already passed into law. So, I mean, that's your decision, but obviously the Libertarian Party does not support forced vaccinations.
Other questions? Okay, we'll move on to Sergeant John, is it Hauser? Howard?
Okay, Honorable Chair, members of the committee, my name is John Hauer. I was a sergeant in the military, in the Army. Served 2 deployments to Iraq, 05-06, also 08-09. Got a combat action badge from all that business. Basically, I'm here to tell kind of my personal view of what kind of goes on in one of these armed conflicts. My first deployment, I was a driver for a convoy security team, so got to see, I don't know, you know, different IEDs and small arms fire, all that kind of stuff. I don't know, like viewing the harming of property of the people of Iraq, because, I mean, we did do some of that, like following the rules of engagement, we had to fire at vehicles or kind of ram vehicles with ours. And most of the time, they were innocent people minding their own business, but we had to stop vehicles because of the rules of engagement. And I don't know, it feels really wrong, but you have to do it anyway. It creates a lot of mental conflict. Our unit's mission, we were a construction engineer battalion, so we were building bases. And we knew that as soon as we left and handed the base over to the Iraqi army, that they were going to strip down every building we built down to the nails and wood and sell it. And we knew that, and we had to build them anyway. Our impression overall was that people were trying to live their lives. We weren't really helping. So the whole winning the hearts and minds that we got told we were there to do really didn't add up to what we actually saw as far as what we were doing there. It was hard to understand our purpose, what we were being asked to basically put our lives on the line for. A lot of us, including myself, really didn't know. And like Al said, during this time, you know, when you're deployed, we were kids. We were like 18, 19, most of us, and most of those who were married, or several of them, a lot of them, you know, their marriages kind of fell apart because they're kids, they're separated, and it just didn't work out. So it causes a lot of damage to families. So these are some very negative aspects of these armed conflicts. Had a buddy that got killed by an IED over there, for example, his wife, pregnant at the time. Of course, all of us, very sad, very angry, and that's when you kind of get, like, you really want revenge. And so it took a lot of, I guess, willpower to kind of calm that down and, you know, realize that he died, you know, for what we weren't sure, but that we just have to be loyal to our friends, keep our emotions under control. Dealing with that kind of stuff, like seeing your friends die, is another one of the really big negative aspects of these armed conflicts. My second deployment, I was a squad leader by this time. We were doing construction missions. As a squad leader, my only goal, I just wanted to bring my troops back alive. And other than that, I really did not care. So we were at a much bigger base this time. We kind of saw firsthand the massive military spending and waste that was going on. And it wasn't necessarily that, but it was just that we could see all the money being poured into this, and it really wasn't what we wanted. Like, we didn't care if they fed us really fancy food. We still just wanted a real purpose, real defined mission, and we still really couldn't get that because, you know, it kept getting changed. You know, first we were there for WMDs, then we were there for getting rid of Saddam, then we were there for winning hearts and minds, and then we were there just kind of to be there. So it was very stressful, and yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of us. Also during that deployment, I had a girlfriend who was also in the military, deployed to the very same base in a different unit. kind of a cross base, but she ended up committing suicide pretty early on in the deployment. And very common thing, and among service members that are deployed, and then also when they return home. It's just a lot to deal with. It's very common. I mean, after that, I also struggled a lot with depression and suicidal thoughts. Because, I mean, we were kids, and it's tough. So my final thoughts on this is that at the end of the day, I got out of the military after about 5 years, 4 months, something like that, and I was fine. I had grown up a lot, actually. I saved up to buy my first house, went to college at K-State, but I was pretty lucky because 2 of my buddies have since died from substance abuse. A lot of others struggle with depression. Once again, a lot of relationships falling apart, a lot of broken homes. And, you know, because when you're a kid and you go through this, you don't ever quite get over it. So final thoughts about that. Military service, it can be very positive, like the physical, discipline, mental toughness. It's a great way to get a head start in life, too. Like, it really helped me out in that way. But these deployments to armed conflicts they're bad for the soldiers and bad for our Kansas soldiers because you're getting deployed, put in harm's way, relationships suffer, and a lot of times, like we felt when we were in Iraq those 2 times, that there's not really a clear purpose or a clear reasoning. So this bill would, if a war is actually declared, I'm pretty sure everyone would be very proud. If you signed up for the military, you are proud to go fight and die for your country. It's just when we're out there doing things that aren't necessarily serving our country or helping the greater good, you know, it's asking a great sacrifice for sometimes questionable causes with these armed conflicts. So, yeah, we're just asking that we only deploy the National Guard for the big things, basically. And I know that nobody here can actually end war. Like, I'd love it if we could, but we can't. But we can end the Kansas National Guard going to these armed conflicts. And they'd still be ready to protect and defend Kansas and our nation. And they're still here, home, not deployed, to help in case of natural disasters and things like that. So I know that no other state has passed this, I heard, so Kansas kind of has a chance to lead the way when it comes to bringing peace and prosperity to our state and our nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Fascadell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Sergeant. Thank you for your service. When you mentioned that you would have preferred a more specific mission or purpose, tell me again exactly what that would have looked like to you.
Well, to me, a lot of us weren't exactly sure why we had to, and we talk about this among ourselves, you know, exactly what our purpose was being in Iraq, because we were told that our purpose was winning hearts and minds of the people. And then every day we were going out and doing, you know, checkpoints. I don't know, basically by all our actions, we were not winning the hearts and minds, and we were doing the exact opposite. We're creating more enemies. Because, you know, every time somebody's cousin or brother, you know, gets killed by our troops, you know, either accidentally or, you know, for in armed conflict, you know, you create a bunch more people that don't like you. And it's like the whole winning the hearts and minds thing, it was just snowballing in reverse. And yeah, we were told that's why we were there. And then it just didn't add up. It was completely the opposite of what was happening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. We're running low on time, so we got about 10 minutes. Laura Schiffman. I'm probably wrong there, but
Oh, you got it right.
there we go.
So, hello, Chairman, committee members. My name's Lauren Schiffman. I'm a civilian from Lenexa, Kansas. Some of you have seen me quite a bit up here over the last couple of months fighting these vaccine mandates. But I have to say that this is the most important testimony I'll probably ever give because I'm advocating for our troops. I was able to save my job in November because of what you all did, which I'm so grateful for in the special session. But this one is truly critical. If we can't preserve the rights and freedoms of the people that fight for our freedom, then we have absolutely nothing, and America is gone forever. I'm speaking today as a proponent for the bill SB 370 for the rights of the National Guard. If we dive into the fundamentals of what we're really talking about in regards to these vaccine mandates, it's all about freedom. That's the whole reason why these members have signed up, to defend our freedom. These vaccine mandates are a true crisis, a moral atrocity, and really destroying what makes America great. Freedom of bodily autonomy, which is ratified in the Constitution, and then also our freedom of choice. It is established in law that the troops are protected from medical experimentation. You may remember the anthrax vaccine, I don't know, a decade ago. That was not FDA approved, and our troops were experimented on. These mandates are no different. I know we're told that we have a FDA approved vaccine for COVID called Comirnaty, but it's not available in the United States, period. There's no discussion. It is not here. It is therefore against the law to force a non-FDA approved vaccine on our troops. The only vaccine that's available in the United States is under EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. The FDA says that these vaccines, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Comirnaty, are legally distinct. They have different ingredients, although we've never seen the ingredient list of the EUA that's available here in the state of Kansas. So we have no package insert. I don't know if y'all have seen, but they're actually blank when they open up. We have no list of ingredients, so therefore we have no informed consent. And the reason why I know this is because I actually went to our webpage, the KDHE. This is actually the consent form that everybody who gets a COVID vaccine has to sign. I have it in my testimony so you can look at it. I guess my question is, there's a lot of questions here. Have you had COVID before? Have you had a reaction? Have you had blood disorders? What happens if you answer yes? Because there's no physician that is willing to sign a medical exemption. We've not been able to find one in our state. And then clearly it states, I have been offered a copy of the COVID-19 Emergency Use Authorization. I have read and explained to me and understand the information of the EUA. So I took it further. I said, okay, let me just make sure when I'm speaking in front of you all that I'm accurate. So I went to find my location to get a vaccine, and this is the CVS near my house. It says Pfizer BioNTech. This is not Comirnaty. This is not FDA approved. So in closing, if we cannot protect our troops from this medical tyranny and this forced medical procedures, then they absolutely have no reason to fight for us. They're out there risking their lives, but if they don't have bodily autonomy and their freedom, honestly, I don't blame them for leaving the military. Please pass this bill. Please stop forced vaccinations. Otherwise, the innovation, entrepreneurialism, and greatness of our country will be gone forever. Thank you. I'll stand for questions if there are any.
Sorry. Are there any further questions? Any questions? Not seeing any. Are there any other oral proponents? Not seeing any. We have a. We're running short on time. It's actually probably. Yeah, well, we have one neutral too that needs to. We have all the written for the proponents. Let's move on to the neutral. Major Kara Beth Newhold.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. Thank you very much, and I would like to also thank the rest of the members of the legislature and the people of Kansas for your continued support of the Kansas National Guard. I'm here today to testify on the fiscal note for Senate Bill 370 on behalf of the Adjutant General's Department. While the note correctly states that the enactment of this bill would not have an immediate fiscal effect, it does not address the risk to the Kansas National Guard's future budgets. For the past 89 years, the Kansas National Guard has required membership in the National Guard of the United States. And this dual enlistment provides for the efficient utilization of our troops to serve both Kansas and our nation. Our dual membership also allows the federal government to provide over 99% of our annual budget. If passed, this legislation could signal to the Pentagon and to the Department of Defense an unwillingness to uphold our sworn federal obligation. Without a federal mission, there's little incentive for the federal government to continue funding the Kansas National Guard. And this could result in the removal of federal units, jobs, and equipment. A loss of federal funding would have a dire impact on our troops and Kansas, as the Kansas National Guard currently provides Kansas with approximately 1,700 full-time positions and another 4,800 part-time positions. It also operates approximately $4.5 billion worth of assets in our state. If the Kansas National Guard loses its federal funding, it would not be able to continue providing the robust support to our communities and the economy. For example, the Kansas National Guard fought the wildfires in western Kansas last month with the federally owned aircraft. And these aircraft are in high demand across the National Guard and could be relocated to another state if we had no federal mission. So as you can see, the loss of federal funding would critically impact not only the Kansas National Guard, but the state of Kansas and its citizens. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak this morning, and I stand by for any questions you may have.
Senator Hildebrand.
Major, thank you for your testimony. You referred to the federal obligation in the federal oath. Do you have a copy of those documents?
I do not have those with me, Senator, but I can get you a copy.
If you would provide those to
Yes, sir.
the committee, thank you.
Senator Fasco-Doe.
Major Carrie Beth, so when you said the word if talking about losing the federal funding, so what does it depend on to help us better with this bill?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you for that question. So it depends on the signal to the Pentagon and the Department of Defense. So as you know, within the military, the budget, there's always a friction point of who gets what and where units or equipment go. So if this legislation passed, that could signal to the Pentagon and Department of Defense that we are unwilling to uphold our federal obligation.
Senator Hosher, and then Longbine, that'll be it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to everybody who testified. Thank you for your service. Sergeant Howard, my brother was in Iraq at the same time as you in the Army, and Major McKnight, I think online, my dad is a Marine, and I hope you don't make your kids get up at 5 a.m. on Saturday like mine did. So anyway, I do have a question. I appreciate the efforts of this bill, especially in terms of the need to have Congress to declare war. As mentioned, though, there's no fiscal note as attached to the state, but I'm guessing that's because the DOD funds the National Guard. So to your point, if we implement statutes that differ from federal guidelines, that's what causes the problem as far as the potential loss of funding, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then if we lose the funding, then we don't have the National Guard in Kansas to help us with wildfires, those other situations.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Major, thank you for your service. I don't really have a specific question from you, but as a senator who represents Fort Riley and the state of readiness that is trained for at Fort Riley, I have serious concerns about this bill. First of all, the National Guard is a key component of our state of readiness in this, not only in this state, but in this country. For us to single ourselves out is something that I believe would be very, very detrimental and send a very poor message to the Department of Defense, not only affecting our National Guard, but probably are active military bases within the state also. The vaccine mandate, I've stated publicly time and time and time again, I do not support mandates, vaccine mandates, but I am not the commander-in-chief of the military. The commander-in-chief of the military has decided that. That is currently being litigated in federal court, and Kansas passing a law is not going to supersede federal action in a federal court. So it's unfortunate that that mandate has come down, but this bill will do absolutely nothing for that. My biggest concern is what message are we sending to the Department of Defense about the state of readiness in Kansas, and how does this affect our military installations? And I can't see any angle that would make it any good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. With that, we'll close the hearing. We're adjourned. Thank you.